There's been two incidents, I guess we could say, in the past few days. One involving two drone strikes hitting a ship and two people dying. And then a second thing, which was reported on like some British channels as being a hijacking. Now they're saying that it was a hijacking that was foiled. Gunmen were on the ship and were chased off by U.S. and Omani forces. So, Connor, let's break down what actually happened here, get into the details that we know. There's a lot of speculation that this is Iran, or, speculation maybe from people in the independent media, the more aware community, that this could potentially be a false flag. So, what do you think is going on here? And again, break down the details for us.
Sure. So we got off the coast of, or near Oman, I should say, we had U.S. officials have said that this was a suicide drone attack. The suicide drones tend to be used by sort of the militias in Iraq. These are not like Reaper drones or the kind of drones that we have sold recently to Taiwan, for instance. These are, like smaller drones that have a kind of an explosive attached to them, and then they fly to the target and explode. So it hasn't. I don't believe up to this point that that's been confirmed, but we did have, I think, an anonymous U.S. official. I forget if it was Reuters or which outlet this official told, but supposedly they suspect Iran, and they suspect that this was an attack with one of these suicide drones. An Israeli official came out and said that that Iran was responsible for this attack pretty immediately after it happened. Now, so the ship it's a Japanese-owned tanker called the Mercer Street, and it's got a Liberian flag on it, and it's operated, I should say, by a British-based company called Zodiac Maritime, which is owned by an Israeli billionaire named Eyal Oler, I want to say. Yeah, I believe that's his name, Eyal Oler, and so yeah, offer, I should say. And so the idea is that this was an Iranian attack against a ship that's managed by a company that's owned by an Israeli. As far as like proof, it's anybody's guess what's happening here. But as per usual with a lot of these accusations that have lately been levied against, for instance, Russia and China, we have yet to get evidence, any solid evidence at all, really. In fact, we heard some pretty obnoxious claims from a lot of Israeli officials, I should say, with respect to the first ship. We can get to the second incident here in a minute. But as these accusations are being thrown out by the Israelis and then followed and then reiterated by the U.S. and the U.K. pretty quickly, there were two deaths, I should add, in this incident, a Romanian and a British national. And so the British have taken this pretty personally and have been threatening. Well, first of all, we've got the foreign minister from Britain coming out and saying the UN needs to take action. The Israelis are demanding the same thing, including military action as far as the Israelis are concerned. The British are threatening to launch some sort of a cyber attack or a special forces attack as well. But so the Saeed Khatizbeh, who's the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, has come out and said these are baseless accusations, and if you have evidence, then all these states who are making these claims should present it. And so when he said that, Naftali Bennett, who's the new prime minister under the new government there in Israel, came out and accused Tehran of this cowardly denial. And he goes, I just heard that Iran in a cowardly manner is trying to shirk its responsibility for the incident. They are denying it, he told a weekly cabinet meeting. He goes, so I determine unequivocally, Iran is the one that carried out the attack on the ship. Iran's bully manners are dangerous, not only to Israel, but also harm global interests, the freedom of navigation, and international trade. And then Bennett said that intelligence evidence exists, and Israel expected the international community to clarify that Iran that it's made a big mistake. So recently in Jerusalem, there was a meeting with run by, I should say, Gantz, the defense minister, Benny Gantz, over there in Israel, and Yair Lapid, the foreign minister. And as far as evidence is, I don't know if you saw anything else, Kyle. They seemed like they were just naming names of different like IRGC officials, and then kind of presenting that as some sort of sort of like a stand-in for this alleged, intelligence evidence that prove that Iran did this. I haven't seen much else, but we've been getting a lot of threats from the Israelis saying that they're like 10 weeks away from having a nuclear bomb, the Iranians, and that the UN needs to attack, and that they may just go ahead and do it themselves.
Yeah. So, one thing I guess to put into context here, too, it's very interesting from the British side that they're so outraged by this because Israel has routinely attacked Iranian ships and has been open about this. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal. I believe it was from like late 2019 into 2021, that 18-month period. There were 12 Iranian ships that were attacked. That was reported one time. And then since, I believe 2 more ships were attacked, including one ship near Syria where 3 Iranians died aboard that ship. And so if this did happen, and if it was Iran, there's room to condemn that kind of thing. Like, I like international trade. I think it's a good thing. If, different countries are attacking different countries' cargo ships and piracy, that hurts international trade. It makes things more expensive. That's bad for people. But at the same time, let's understand that, this piracy business, this attacking cargo ships, has been going on for several years. And it's a part of this asymmetrical warfare or actual warfare that's been going on between Israel, the United States, our other allies in the Middle East, versus Iran and potentially, maybe some allied groups like Hezbollah or Shia militias in Iraq or Syria, right? And so, there's select outrage this time because a British person died, and you just seem to like get this kind of very quiet admission from the British that they really don't want to say, though, that, this time one of the people who died, their life matters. And it's because it's a British person. It's because it's not an Iranian. And so there's something really disturbing about that. Connor, anything else you want to add, I guess, about this first attack before we could talk about it in bigger context after we talk about the hijacking too. As you said, I haven't seen any actual evidence that would lead me to believe Iran was behind this. Certainly if you look at a map, Iran is a country that's close here. Again, if you look at what's happened in the Middle East over the past, especially 3 years since Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, it wouldn't be completely out of character for this to happen. At the same time, though, nobody has put forward evidence that says that that this was Iran, and we know it was Iran. And this is largely the case with the other attacks too that have been attributed to Iran over the past, again, like 3, 4, maybe even 5 years now, that this has been going on in that region. So Connor, should we move on to the second incident, which is a little bit more current? This was a hijacking that I saw initially reported on just kind of British information channels, and haven't gotten a whole lot of information about it, or even really there were people on board. There's some reports that maybe they're Iranian, but what do we actually know about this attack?
Well, this one's arguably more opaque than even the first attack. Well, I shouldn't even say this is an attack, because I haven't seen much evidence that what exactly happened here. So a maritime trade agency under the British Defense Ministry said that this ship had been hijacked, and different basically, sources told Reuters that Iran-backed forces were involved. They had boarded the ship. It was called the Asphalt Princess. And so the Omanis deployed some planes flying sorties near the area. They sent some ships from their navy out there to secure the waters. Recently, the UK has said that the hijacking is over. And what I found really interesting was that, as far as, like I said, again, in this situation, the evidence is not really forthcoming. However, what's interesting to me is that you have the American State Department essentially just jumping on board with these accusations that Iran is involved. So you got Ned Price, who's a spokesman for the State Department, saying they suspect Iranian personnel are involved. And as you can see here, he says, "We believe that these personnel were Iranian, but we're not in a position to confirm this at this time. Iran has undertaken a pattern of belligerence in terms of proxy attacks in the region, and of course these maritime attacks." Now he's referring to when he says these proxy attacks, he's mostly talking about, I assume, these attacks on U.S. bases out in Syria and Iraq. But arguably, that's it's not really, it's sort of debatable if that's certainly not I wouldn't classify that as aggression at all. And it's kind of, especially after the Biden administration has bombed these groups a couple of times and killed, many of their personnel, or at least a handful. I mean, they're retaliating because the parliament in Iraq, for instance, voted last year to expel U.S. forces, and we get these sort of it's just kind of like, where they changed recently the mission in Iraq to, well, now it's advisory, it's no longer a combat mission, but we're not really taking any troops or doing anything significant to change the situation there. So, I mean, these attacks are essentially being provoked. So I wouldn't say it's a pattern of belligerence, but that's just more propaganda. And then these maritime attacks, the idea that you would, oh yeah, like Iran is synonymous with again, they're conflating those militias with Iran, but the idea, again, with these suicide drones, the idea that this is like some sort of a militia attack that could be connected to Iran in some way, if you could trace it back to like one of these Iraqi militias that are just sort of in the mainstream media. There's a lot of differences that they have, particularly now as time goes on, as more nationalist interests in Syria and particularly Iraq have more influence over these militias like the PMF in Iraq. Then, when they were formed, it was more or less, they're much closer to holding the Iranian line, but that's been changing. But, for U.S. purposes, the whole idea is like, well, we bombed these groups and we sent a message to Iran. So they conflate them. But, they're saying that these Iranian personnel were involved. We have an unnamed U.S. official telling Business Insider that they have a U.S. military aircraft that photographed suspected Iranian gunmen on board the ship who appeared to remove something from the vessel. I don't believe they've released any of those pictures. So, it's just interesting to me, like I said, that the Americans are jumping on board with these, again, like I said, these very opaque accusations. And we had a spokesman for the Iranian armed forces who dismissed these reports, calling it psychological warfare intended to stir up adventurism against Iran. And in practice, that's basically been true. I mean, you have the UK, like I said, the UK demanding action from the UN, and Israel just saying like, we're going to start attacking. It's pretty ironic to hear the Israelis say to the UN, is there such a thing as international law anymore? Is anybody going to enforce it, or are we going to have to do it ourselves? And they basically said, there's just more and more threats coming out.